monster or pterodactyl in southern Utah in 2016. This is part of the email I got in October of 2024 from the eyewitness. Quote, I had a friend who had property where I daily went to climb a big hill. I would climb it, then sit, read, or watch bird and wildlife, and just loved the view. One day there it was, just across the way, landing on another hill. Impossible, yet there it was. The long hook on the back of the head, the bat-like shape of its wings. I saw it just as it was landing, so I did not see if it had a tail. It landed into a squat-like position and sat there with a gentle motion as it folded its wings down to its side. A flying dinosaur and a photo from the American Civil War? Not exactly. This photograph was probably recorded years after the Civil War ended, during the Reconstruction era. What about this apparent pterodactyl? It is more likely than not a genuine pterosaur that was alive during the 19th century. For details, see a link in the description to see this video. Now look at this weird feature on the wing. What is that? It's also on the other wing. The end parts of the wings were inverted. Flying dinosaur sighting reports in 2021. I have some sighting reports, one in North Carolina, details of that sighting. Cover a little bit about scientific papers on modern pterosaurs, and we might get into a little bit this video of a ropin flying in North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, a few years ago. Pterosaur sightings in South Carolina. Non-extinct pterodactyls or flying dinosaurs. To avoid missing details, watch the original videos. This one is number 5. The huge creature had no feathers. Standing in the middle of the country road, it was at least 10 feet tall. About 2 years later, in that same area, South Carolina. I'm Jonathan Whitcomb. Why do people report pterodactyls in Ohio and Kentucky? You heard right, living pterodactyls. There's nothing wrong with people in Kentucky and Ohio. Ordinary people in surrounding states also report a living pterodactyl, also called a flying dinosaur, dragon, featherless bird, and dinosaur bird. Pterodactyl sightings in New York State. East of Buffalo, in the words of an eyewitness,
my friend and I, in the creek accessed from my backyard, sighted a very strange creature that we both thought to be a prehistoric bird. I thought pterodactyl. It was a grayish color,
with no apparent feathers.
I would estimate the wingspan to be 6 feet.
In Massena, New York, in about the summer of 2004, the police officer William Lasham saw an apparent pterosaur and had a good view of it. It had no feathers, and its long tail had a, quote, spade, unquote, at the end of it. It was not a bird. He referred to it as a prehistoric creature with a wingspan of maybe 5 feet. Pterodactyl sightings in Los Angeles. These are some of the encounters people have had with apparent living pterosaurs in Los Angeles County. Number 1. The lady is anonymous, but leaves us the following testimony.
I am 38 years old and a very sensible woman, with an education and skeptical mind. This bird is real and now in a very populated area. At 11:45 a.m., I was sitting under my gazebo in Lakewood, California. My dog started going crazy barking. I walked out from under the awning and lost my breath. I saw this huge, dragon pterodactyl-looking thing.
The lady clearly saw the flying creature here, perched on a phone line. It may have been like the pterosaur seen in Cuba in the 1960s and early 70s. The animal probably flies through this storm channel at night. The lady drew a rough sketch of the end of its tail. Under the phone line is this channel. A game camera was placed there, but it failed to photograph any pterosaur. But the sister of that lady saw the camera and asked about it. She then reported her own sighting of something like a dragon flying near that same storm channel, but about 3 years earlier. That sighting by the sister was at about 11 at night, but she told nobody about that strange flying creature until she heard about her sister's more recent encounter with a, quote, dragon pterodactyl, unquote. Sighting number 3 was east of Griffith Park in Los Angeles. 3, quote, dragons, unquote, flew over the I-5 freeway. It was at 6:10 a.m. near this part of the Los Angeles River. This is the lady's email.
This morning I saw 3 dragons flying over the 5 North Freeway between Griffith Park and Glendale. Their wings were long, angular, and pointed, and their tails had triangular points.
Sighting number 3 was less than a year after number 1. Sighting number 4 was only a few weeks after number 3 and less than 2 miles away. Devin Rodriguez reported, quote, I'm almost positive what I saw fly over the freeway was not a bird of any kind, not a feather in sight, unquote. Sighting number 5 was on the other side of Griffith Park to the west of it. Quote, on March 24th, 2018, at about 2:30 p.m., I saw what I would call a pterosaur heading south on Barham Road. Then it glided directly over me, and I recognized what it was immediately. Were these sightings from a recent migration of pterodactyls from Mexico? No, they've been here a long time. Flying-Dinosaur in California. Quote, in 2005, I saw 2 pterosaurs flying, neither flapping their wings until almost out of sight. They were almost straight above me. It was as if I stepped into a portal of time long ago. I knew exactly what they were. Birds I learned about in school growing up, one that's been extinct for millions of years. My guess is the wingspan of the first and larger one was about 14 foot. They seemed to be going directly to Lake San Vicente. My brain raced trying to make sense of what was clearly passing right before my eyes. I had never heard of anyone claiming to have seen one of these. Pterodactyls in Los Angeles storm channels. That is really weird. What's going on here? You could think, well, how can that be? You know, it should be discovered by now. You have I'm Jonathan Whitcomb, but let me get to the confession. A few decades ago, when I was a very young man, which would make it quite a few decades ago, my sister was in high school, Pasadena High School in Southern California. She had a friend, we'll call her Mary. But Mary told my sister that she had seen a pterodactyl just at the northern end of Allen Avenue in Altadena, California, a few miles from where we lived. It was a huge pterodactyl that flew up into the mountains. Now my sister tried to convince her, wait, maybe you saw some kind of very large bird? But no. Mary was convinced she'd seen a pterodactyl. What did I think? I thought, oh, that girl is crazy. It's absolutely ridiculous. How could she think that she saw a giant pterodactyl that was alive and flying up into the mountains near her house? It's just impossible. How could she think that? Well, that's my confession, because a few decades later, when I was right in the middle of my investigation in this narrow branch of cryptozoology, my sister reminded me of that, and she got the phone number for this lady we'll call Mary, and I gave her a phone call. Now, by this time, I had interviewed people from all over the world, hundreds of eyewitnesses of similar things, pterodactyls of various sizes, some of them quite big. And so when I talked with Mary on the phone, I had a totally different attitude, and I believed her. The other day I got a phone call from Todd Davis, who reported a sighting of an apparent pterosaur in San Diego, California. at about 8 or 8:30 p.m., May 20th, 1995. The flying creature was backlit from the city lights on the other side of the canyon. The animal had wings like a bat, but the wingspan was about 10 to 15 feet, and it had a long beak. The eyewitness was about 50 to 80 feet away from the apparent pterodactyl, and it was only slightly above him as it flew over the small pterodactyl sightings in California. Sighting number 1, reported in 2013. It was in Moose Park in Modesto. Quote, "It turned its head and looked right at me. Its leathery wings, like no bird I've ever seen. A long tail, no feathers," unquote. Sighting number 2 was at Mount Shasta in Northern California. Quote, "A long tail, no feathers. I believe the wingspan was at least 50 feet. Had leathery wings," unquote. Sighting number 3, near Culver City, Los Angeles County. Quote, "I was crossing over the creek when I heard a bunch of birds take off. I was stopped dead by what flew in front of my car. I had to gather my thoughts. I know it was a pterosaur." 3 pterodactyls and the Oregon surfer in 1986 at Brookings. Quote, "I was surfing early morning when the waves went flat and fog moved in. I was sitting on my surfboard when 3 huge, 18 feet across wingspan glided right at me out of the fog. I was knocked off my board. Newspaper articles about living pterosaurs. Well, this is just a brief introduction. Over the years, occasionally a skeptic will say, well, why are there no newspaper articles if there really are modern pterodactyls? We live in a culture in Western countries in which it's just assumed that pterosaurs have been extinct for a long time. Pterosaurs are thought of like flying dinosaurs. The vast majority of the species of pterosaurs that lived in the past are indeed extinct. In other words, when I report living pterosaurs, I'm referring to a very narrow range of characteristics that eyewitnesses send me. Put yourself in the position of a newspaper reporter that he or she wants to just get the article published. Well, you can't just go out and say, yeah, this is apparently there are really live pterodactyls in our community flying overhead at night. They have to approach the situation from the point of view of the average reader. The average reader will be assuming that these animals are extinct and that any report of living ones must be mistaken. So generally, a newspaper, will, especially the larger papers in the United States, will just report what a person believes they saw, or will report my research on it and eyewitnesses. For example, in North Carolina, just a year ago, there was a newspaper there, one of the largest in the state of North Carolina, that published an article about my research and about eyewitnesses of apparent living pterosaurs in Raleigh, North Carolina. This was done not with a positive attitude like, oh, maybe it's real, maybe they're really pterodactyls, but from a very skeptical point of view, and this is normal for large newspapers. Let's go to another newspaper, the Press-Telegram, late in the year 2004. They printed my story of my expedition that happened just a few weeks earlier in 2004, and they used my own words. They just printed what I gave them. It was not in the normal part of the newspaper. It was in the travel section, and I was relating what had happened to me when I traveled to Papua New Guinea and explored an Umbo Island.
Did it have a tail?
Yeah.
It had a tail, okay.
Feathers.
No comparison? Okay. So
No feathers.
no feathers?
Yeah,
Okay.
just skin.
And so that not all newspapers are always negative about living pterosaurs. You have to see the perspective of how things are done. Pterosaur sighting in New Mexico. Rope and seen by 3 men. For the original video, see the link in the description. In eastern New Mexico, while driving on a highway, the 3 men saw a pterosaur fly right in front of their car, maybe less than 200 feet away. 2 of the eyewitnesses, Parsons and Kenzie, testified on a video on the YouTube channel Modern Explorer. Jason Kenzie said, quote, "I know it wasn't a stork. I know storks. I know the great blue heron. It looked like a giant bat. That leather look, the little hands on the wings," unquote. Those 2 eyewitnesses also said that the tail was long and at the end of the tail was a, quote, "spade shape," unquote. In the words of the eyewitness, "I saw one in 2003, Kuna, Idaho. I was at my brother's house. My brother and I were standing in his driveway. As I looked to the south, I saw the enormous creature gliding through the air, wingspan 25 to 30 feet, gliding very slow. It was absolutely silent. Dark brown, no feathers, wings had claws on the outer edges, feet with claws. As it got closer, its head cocked to the side, and it flapped its wings to stay at glide, maybe 35 to 40 feet off the rooftops, soaring above this subdivision. It was so close I could have thrown a rock at it and hit it. My niece stepped out the front door. My brother and I yelled at her to go back in. This creature could easily fly off with 250 pounds, making most anyone a meal. It showed no signs of being concerned with our presence. It looked right at us. It slowly glided away. I have no doubt in what I witnessed in Kuna. I had several people tell me they have seen this very same thing over the years, and it was only a shocker to me. I just got an email from this lady who said she saw a documentary about a sighting of a pterodactyl. Quote, "I am writing to tell you I saw the same creature, but it was between 1969 to 1970 and in the northeast corner of Colorado. I was horseback riding when suddenly my horse stopped dead in her tracks, then began to tremble violently. I looked over her head to follow her direction of sight, and I saw it. This thing was huge and gliding rather than flying, and it was very close to the ground. I was up on a slight incline of this hill, and it glided past us within 20 yards. Its skin was yellowish tan or olive green color, leathery looking, no feathers. I looked it in the eye, and to me, it looked evil. It didn't make any sound at all. There was the appendage on the top of its head." In Arkansas, when Kathy McNeil was 16 years old, she and her father saw a featherless flying creature. The tail on the apparent pterosaur suggests it was a ropen, a long-tailed rhamphorhynchoid. One flew over Oklahoma City at about 8:30 a.m., On September 18, 2014, the man who saw it said it looked like these that were seen in Cuba in 1971 by the U.S. Marine Eskin Kun. Ropens are seen across North America. 3 eyewitnesses saw one in northern Minnesota. It was as big as one lane of the highway. The teeth were sharp. A man and his wife were driving in Indiana at 9:40 p.m. on June 10, 2017, when they saw what at first appeared like a monster bat. Then it flew in front of their car. The tail was long, and that long tail had a triangle shape at the end. The man said later, quote, "I honestly believe we saw a living dinosaur," unquote. Open pterodactyl in Texas, sighting number 1, quote, "My girlfriend and I just seen what I guess is called a ropen. It was huge. Wingspan, I believe, covered both lanes," unquote. That pterosaur sighting was while the couple drove towards Wichita Falls, Texas. Sighting number 2, quote, "I was driving from Katy to Houston. Something big glided over the road. I swear it looked like a pterodactyl. When I got to work and told my co-workers, I got teased about drinking or smoking something. Step ahead a few years. I was talking to my wife on the phone. She said, 'Oh, what am I looking at? Something is standing in front of the water trough. I'll call you right back.' I called her back and asked her, 'What was it?' 'I don't have any idea. Its neck was long and it had a pointy beak and head. It looked like a pterodactyl,' unquote. That husband and wife each had their own sighting in different years. On about September 25th, 2021, I'd phoned Alex Salinas and talked with him. It was in about 1998, when he was about 17 years old, when he saw the flying creature at about 11:30 at night near what are now called the North Side Apartments in West Laco, Texas. The area is a bit north of Walmart in West Laco. A mist hung over the grass, but the sky was clear when he saw something flying. At first, Alex thought it was a crane, but it was flying alone at night. Not a habit of cranes in that area. It was gliding slowly. Alex estimated only 2 to 3 feet per second. As it got closer, he realized it was not a crane or any other kind of bird. It was leathery and had a long tail. It had a horn-like head crest that it held close to the neck most of the time, at least at first. Alex took off on his bike to get a better view, and when he got closer, he yelled at the creature. It responded by turning its head, yet did not change its flight direction. When it was better illuminated by a street light, Alex saw the animal's 3 claws on each wing. The pterodactyl flexed those claws, which gave the eyewitness the impression that they resembled human fingers. At about that time, the animal flexed its talons. Alex told me that about 2 to 3 months before his sighting, a 3 to 5-year-old girl went missing in that area. Please take that missing child case in context with 2 other reports in the United States. First, a preschool girl was attacked by a large flying creature in western Oklahoma. That animal was covered with hair and had teeth in its beak. The girl escaped by dropping down to the ground as the flying creature dived toward her. In that area of Oklahoma, children had gone missing.
I went to turn onto a highway, and as soon as I took a right and started going down the road, I looked up and I saw a large flying creature. And it immediately drew my attention because its wings were not flapping like a bird's would. It was rolling kind of like a stingray in the ocean. So what happened was, as I was traveling north, it appeared over my shoulder in the windshield here of the car, and it was flying in this direction. As it was doing that, I decided to keep an eye on it, and I was so curious as to what it was. So I was going the same direction it was, and it eventually moved over towards a tree line about 100 yards off to my left, and I saw it start to dive, and so I continued to watch it. And it slowly dove down and landed at the end of the tree line. And then when it went to dive down by the tree line, I noticed that there was a long tail with a bulb at the end of it, and I kept double checking to make sure, and I'm like, that has to be a tail.
The Cook County, Illinois dinosaur could be called by some persons a non-extinct pterodactyl, or a prehistoric flying creature, or a dragon pterodactyl. I'm Jonathan Whitcomb. I call it a modern pterosaur. I now quote the eyewitness. Quote, I was 17 in 1968. It was late spring, and I went outside my residence at Lansing, Illinois. As I started to my neighbor's house, I caught a glimpse of something in the eastern sky. I stopped, looked up, and there, just above the trees, about 100 feet past, was this pterosaur. I couldn't believe it. It fanned its bat-like wings moderately as it went by, and I didn't know what to do, so I yelled as loud as I could at it. It turned its head and opened its mouth, and when I saw the rows of big teeth, I shuddered and wondered if I'd have to get under a car or something. It traveled straight west as I watched it disappear over the horizon. Unquote. I asked him if he recalled whether or not it had a long tail, and he answered in his second email, telling me it had a, quote, spade-ending tail, unquote. In his third email, he said, quote, it had a long tail with a spade-looking end. It had long, finger-like claws at the middle joint of the wings.
We were like looking at it, and it come down on top of us.
Why do pterodactyls attack people? Don't go fishing at the wrong place at the wrong time. That happened to Frank Cecilia, and its wingspan was about 21 feet. But why were Frank and his two cousins in danger while fishing? And what group of people are not fishing when they're attacked? And how can those flying creatures be pterosaurs? Aren't they all extinct, like dinosaurs? We will get to each of the answers, beginning with Frank's encounter in 1984, before getting into details on his sighting that night. Here's the point. That big flying creature was not trying to catch one of the three men for its dinner. It was a territorial dispute. It was most likely protecting its fishing territory.
2, 3 o'clock in the morning, it's really catfishing time. So to steer a line, we used to get a tire, and we used to light a tire on fire. And this black shadow goes past us, and we looked at each other and said, what was that? And that black shadow comes straight down on top of us, very prehistoric. It was a pterodactyl. I'd say 15 feet, 20 feet, it was just hovering on it. And we started screaming like that. So we had our fishing rods, 7-foot fishing rods, and we started whacking at it. And it would come down and try to pick us up with its talons.
Frank assumed that the flying creature was trying to carry away one of them, but it was very likely a defense of the animal's territory. It probably was catching fish from that river at night.
Yeah, what it would do, it would come up to like 15, 20 foot, just out of the reach of our ugly stick, and just hover there flat. And then it would come down, and when it came down, it would open its claws up and try to like come and pick us up. And when it came down at us, we would hit it, and we would hit it like the lower body and at its feet. It came down at us at least 12, 15 times.
I received several emails from Sandra Paradise in September of 2008. I now quote from them. In my searches, I have been trying to find someone who might be interested in helping me to verify the existence of an animal I have seen twice in the last few weeks on my way to work. You don't have to go to New Guinea. As far as I can tell, You can sit on a hill outside the town where I live in the mornings and see them. One sighting was at 7 in the morning and one was at 9 a.m. Both days were overcast days, which I feel was very conducive to me seeing them. No sun in my eyes. Both times I called a friend and told him what I saw so I can verify the times and dates. I live in a small town in northeast Georgia called Winder. I drive a commute that is roughly 25 miles long through the woods. 15 miles of this commute lie along one road, Highway 82. This two-lane road is nothing but pasture, then woods, more pasture, then more woods. On August 27th, this put me in the road at about 6:45 a.m. The day was overcast. We were just getting over Tropical Storm Faye. I had driven less than 10 miles from the house, and suddenly an animal flew out from my right. Alone in the car, I shouted out loud, What is that?" And it flew directly in front of my car across the road. It was tan, a lighter brown, like the deer we have here. The thing that made me shout out was the shape of the tail. As it leapt out from the woods, I saw it from below, and the tail was very long, with a shape on the end. Its wings were probably half spread, and I saw several dark, thin, horizontal bands across the belly. The path it took was up and then swooping down, as if it were dive-bombing my car. As it crossed my path in front and slightly above me, I saw it had a head that was curved like a hammer. The head had a crest on the top that was solid, not feathery at all. I could make out the darkness of an eye. The tail was long, had a ridge that ran along the underside and ended in a thick, heart-shaped pad. The tail I got a good look at. I was floored. I knew what it was. I couldn't believe what it was, but I knew what it was. I called a buddy whom I knew was up and moving coherently at that hour. The classic, "Dude, you won't believe what I just saw" conversation ensued. I flat out told him I'd seen a pterodactyl. My buddy chortled at me. "You've seen a great blue heron, probably carrying a snake. From a distance they looked just like a pterodactyl." Part of me was thinking, well, sure, of course. Something like that was what it was. Couldn't be what it looked like. Couldn't be. And the other part of me was thinking, you know damn well what that was. And then I looked at the link he sent and Googled some herons flying, other birds, and whatever it might be, a great blue heron ain't it. Color is wrong, shape is wrong, all wrong. Pterodactyl? Now for a pterodactyl sighting in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Kevin was at the Elm Brook Memorial Hospital in the afternoon of September 21st, 1988, waiting for the birth of his first child. Alone in the waiting room, he looked out the window and saw something flying in and out of the clouds. Kevin soon realized it was not a plane, and he later reported to a journalist, quote, "It was bigger than a full-sized pickup truck, but smaller than a Piper Cub plane," unquote. On hunting trips, he'd seen large birds, but this was much bigger. The flying creature glided closer. He later gave a wingspan estimate, 12 to 15 feet. When it got to within 300 feet of the hospital, Kevin thought about calling for somebody to come look at it so they could verify what he was observing. That is when he sensed that the creature was looking back at him. The young man instinctively froze and kept quiet. The animal was probably unaware that window glass separated it from that human, but it took no chances, soaring away into the clouds. Kevin did not see any feathers on it and said, quote, "It was more bat-like," unquote. He concluded that it was related to some kind of pterodactyl. Do pterodactyls eat bats? Some modern pterosaurs eat bats. In the spring of 2020, I know what I saw was two pterosaurs. Spring at around 5:30 in the morning, I was driving to work and it was a black, and foggy morning when I came into a very clear part of the road just before I went through a swampy area, but I saw two pterosaurs chasing a bat. I could see them very clearly as they were right in front of me, and I had just turned on my bright lights as I usually do when I get to that close to the swamp because there are no street lights along that stretch of road. I had stopped my car when I saw them and was shocked and amazed at how swift and maneuverable they were and were working as a team to catch this rather large bat. I wonder if that might be the big brown bat that's found in certain areas of the United States. Anyway, continue, quote, I watched them very closely for about 2 to 3 minutes as they crisscrossed in front of my car's headlights and then disappeared into the darkness. I have told my family and a couple of friends, knowing me, they believed me when I told them what I saw, for they know, with my knowledge of animals and so-called extinct dinosaurs, I know the difference between a bat and a pterosaur. Whoa! Ropen courtship in Washington State. Teenager biker in shock. Pterodactyl pair tries to mate. This sighting of two long-tailed modern pterosaurs was in about 1987. In the words of the eyewitness, quote, I was riding my bike home from a friend's house around 5 p.m., unquote. I lived in the country with my parents. I heard a strange noise, a screech. I looked to my left. On a wood plank fence were two of the biggest bird-like creatures I could ever imagine. I almost crashed my bike. I noticed their heads, then I thought, this can't be. Could they be dinosaurs? Ropens? I stood on the road and watched them for about an hour. One was hopping off the fence and appeared like it was teasing the other one. They were huge. Their feet wrapped around a 2-inch by 6-inch plank. Their heads, maybe 4 feet long with the beak. Their tails were maybe 6 feet long. I was so scared. Sighting number 1, quote, I've seen one in Durham, North Carolina, off Roxbury Road early in the morning, flying over the road in front of me. It was unmistakable and was huge, bigger than the local herons and other kinds of birds. It was a dark color, not black though. The tail was long. It wasn't like the feet of a heron that hangs from the back. This tail was very long with a diamond at the end. This was about a year ago before the pandemic, unquote. Sighting number 2. The two eyewitnesses were at a cemetery at night near the Duke University Hospital and the Durham Freeway. The clouds that night reflected the city lights, allowing those two persons to see the flying creature's silhouette. It glided from the direction of the freeway. It seemed to be a fast glide, about 50 to 70 feet above the ground, and had a wingspan estimated between 17 and 23 feet. It later appeared again, flying in the opposite direction. The man who reported the sighting to me, Jonathan Whitcomb, came to the conclusion that they had witnessed a pterosaur because of the wing shape. He told me that the wings were triangular, unlike any large bird. The other eyewitness later saw it again, years later, in a nearby part of Durham. Sighting number 3. Dane Simmons was driving in the Durham area just before dusk one day in 1993. Through his open sunroof, he saw a flying creature with huge bat-like wings. He estimated the wingspan 10 to 15 feet. In December of 2017, Dane contacted me by email. Here's part of what he told me. Quote, my sighting has haunted me ever since. I know what I saw. Most of my friends laughed at me, unquote. Danny Rodriguez was sitting outside his house in Jupiter, Florida with a friend at about 2:30 in the morning when something flew over their heads. They watched it pass over Danny's house towards the backyard. Danny later reported details to a cryptozoologist. Quote, "It was a beige-brownish color with pointed wingtips, no feathers, pointed beak, and what made me think pterosaur was that long pointed thing protruding from the back of its head." I live in Florida, so I've seen my share of cranes and whatnot, but this was not a bird. A second later, something made us look across the street where we saw a second one flying over a house, flying down into that house's backyard. The first creature was only about 4 feet wingspan. It was a lot smaller than I would think a pterodactyl would be. As soon as we saw the second one across the street, we immediately looked at each other and just shook our heads, and I said, "Was that what I think it was?" And he said, "Nah, it had to be something else," unquote. This was a sighting by a college professor, unlike most eyewitnesses. Professor Stephen Waters saw it on November 14th, 2012. Quote, "Today I was blessed with a sight that will never be forgotten. A huge Ramperinkus-like flying entity grabbed my attention. It was flying close enough it could have been shot down. It was that close. I ran to the door and lost my breath in disbelief. Estimated wingspan, 8 to 12 feet. A tail as long as its torso, with a large bulb or lump at the tail end. No feathers. It soared with very slow flaps. Slow and few wing flaps compared to flying creatures in general. Flying creature in England. Pterodactyl sightings in Shropshire. You decide what to think about these 3 sightings. First, an encounter in the Silken Way in February of 2017. Here's where the sighting happened. In the words of the eyewitness, quote, "I was traveling along the main trail and just passed a bench which had stood since before I was born. A creature with a wingspan of about 4 to 6 feet flew directly overhead. Our area does have nesting bats, but this was way too big," unquote. Now for the second sighting in Shropshire in 2017. Quote, "I am a mother of 4 and am 32 years old. I live on the Welsh border, Whitchurch. I am in the best of health mentally. I do not take any form of narcotics nor prescription pills, and I do not drink. I went into the garden. We live in a wildlife reserve which has an abundance of birds and wildlife, including eagles and hawks, heron, geese, swans, etc. It's usual for them to fly overhead, and I see them. You hear their calls and get familiar with sounds. On this particular morning, I heard a very strange screech. I had never heard it before, and it was very loud. I could hear it getting closer. Nothing prepared me for what I actually saw. I saw 2 pterodactyl flying side by side. It had a giant-sized beak, and the wings had no feathers," unquote. The lady did research, but no bird was like the 2 flying things she encountered. Quote, "After a day of research, I kept it to myself, except telling my husband, who remained skeptic but listened very nicely." Sighting number 3. Quote, "A few days later, 2 of my children were playing in the garden Around 10 a.m., my son of 13 years came running into me. He saw a big brown bird with giant wings. He did have a look of fright or concern on his face, so I knew he wasn't trying to pull my leg or was exaggerating. My younger daughter, who is 9, was with him. She didn't see it as she was playing by the trees, but she heard its sound. She happens to be a very good mimic when it comes to animals, and she made the sound that I had heard. I went through pictures of birds with my son. He said that it was bigger than the eagle which usually fly around the area. What I saw had no feathers, and its wings were almost bat-shaped, unquote.
And then out the back of its head was a crest.
So it was directly overhead before it flew off into the cloud.
Leathery, had the claws on the wings.
I was convinced that there were living pterosaurs in that part of the world. We went and interviewed Harriet, the mother, and heard about her sighting from a very short distance.
I saw something that I had only before witnessed in books. I didn't know there were such creatures at all. But it had a big wingspan. It had a very sharp, long beak. I never saw it open, but a long, narrow beak. I was actually terrified because it was such an unusual thing. And it's the same area that my husband and Steve saw the 3 other ones going down the branch of another river. I could take you there today, and I know what I saw.
Were they have feathers, or was it more leathery like?
Had no feathers. If I was to describe it, I would say it was more like maybe snake skin.
Did you see scales, or was it just smooth?
No, it was more smooth than scales, but it had no feathers, no covering like that of any kind.
I told her if Steve ever goes back over there, I'd like to go with him. Last summer she told me he was going. Said he'd be happy to have some people go with him, so Pete and I met with him.
I thought we ought to look for an observation point. So I got up on the grade and went up, and I found an area that looked like would work. It wasn't very far, about 150 feet from our hut, and I took the camera.
On March 25th, we had a pretty momentous occasion. You were sick that day.
Well, I was in my hammock, and I heard big bird, and I came out, I grabbed the camera, I looked up into the sky, and I saw it almost right away. It was almost directly above me. It was larger than any of the eagles or any of the other birds that we'd seen. Leathery, had the claws on the wing. I saw the animal, and I was just stunned. You just turned the camera on, and I tried to focus in on it, but it was a very bright day. Almost no clouds in the sky except for very high clouds, white. So I could not get a good view of the thing. I only had a LCD screen to look at. Didn't have a viewfinder, like a hole to look through, a peephole that I could have shaded my eyes. I just shot it up into the air, hoping that I would get an actual shot of this thing.
Do modern pterosaurs ever attack humans? For most of those flying creatures, never. But beware of the large exceptional ones, those rare pterodactyls that might, on occasion, attack someone somewhere on the planet. This is a memorial for a fisherman who died many years ago on a small island in northern Papua New Guinea. I never met the man. As I understand, he died many years before I was on Umboy Island and many miles to the north. Yet the tragedy of his death may help us come to some kind of understanding that may help us each do something to make this world a better place. Over the past 17 years, I've received hundreds of reports directly from the eyewitnesses themselves, persons who have encountered apparent non-extinct pterosaurs. Only about 1% of those accounts included any indication that would even hint at the possibility that a dinosaur bird or anything like a primitive flying creature was in a mood to harm a human. Stay with me to near the end of this video to get details on a terrifying encounter a teenage girl had with a huge flying creature at night in Virginia. For now, we focus on Papua New Guinea in the Southwest Pacific, where I led a roping expedition in 2004. About 150 miles north of Umboy Island is Manus Island. In this area, the natives call the roping core. In 2010, I received a few emails from a native who was born on Manus. I now quote parts of his emails. Quote, "This is the story from the grandson of the man who killed the creature." Unquote. As a side note, the native man who killed a core eventually died from the injuries he received from the animal. The native apparently was defending himself from continuous attack from the flying creature. Now back to the story. Quote, "It has been endemic to the southeast Rapatona electorate until the early 1940s, where they declined in numbers. It was so bad that fishing at night stopped for years." Unquote. I have no independent verification for that, but apparently the natives in this area stopped fishing at night because of the danger from those flying creatures. Now back to emails. Quote, "The creature's described as having skin all over it." The oldies reckoned the core, as it is called by them, fished by skimming slowly around on the ocean's surface. Large ones have been seen to take turtles, dolphin, and even young crocodiles." Unquote. Now we get to the attack on the native fishermen. Quote, "This story is from the early 60s, the last death reported by this creature. The native of Tandul village, Pack Island, went fishing and was attacked. The animal destroyed his canoe and he fought it with a traditional fishing spear. Every time the animal attacked, he dived under, and when the light above him showed the animal, he would lunge up, doing only slight damage. It followed him to shore, where a sea cave runs into a crevice which leads into the middle of the island. Badly wounded and backing into this barret, he wedged the spear into a crevice and took the animal through the mouth with the spear. He crawled out, was found by villagers who went to see the animal and told his story. He died 3 days later. Now there are only a few very shy. They have a suspected area. They live in the middle of large volcanic islands in caves. The natives declare it taboo and is never visited." Unquote.
Me and my brother and my stepbrother, we went out to go try to find anything.
And there's 3 of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was you and your brother Dallin, and then there was your
My stepbrother.
stepbrother is Jonathan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who saw the creature first?
I did.
Who saw the flying creature first?
My brother.
Dallin? Okay.
We're all just looking up in the sky and kind of looking around. Just the animals that live next door. There's a little farm next door. They started making all these weird noises and everything like that. And it flies over. I see it, and I was like, "Guys, look at over there!" And they didn't look, I guess, in time. I slide.
Dallin and I and Jonathan were sitting on top of the playground on a mini exercise trampoline that we had moved up there, and we had a blanket wrapped around us. And then from Dallin's angle, he could see behind this tree a little bit, and he was just like, "What is that?" And Jonathan and I were like, "What?" And so Dallin just jumped out of the blanket, slid down the slide, jumped around behind the tree, and he's just freaking out, looking at the sky. He's just like, "What is that up there? What is it? It's like a giant bird or something."
It's like this bird kind of thing, flying, soaring though. It wasn't flapping.
And I was like, "No, he's pulling my leg." So Jonathan slid down, and he started freaking out too. And I was like, "They planned this. I knew they planned this." So I just took my time. I wasn't going to rush down if they were playing a joke on me.
Soaring, it was fairly close.
We heard the dogs and stuff, and the animals, all the pigs and the horses and stuff or whatever, just go crazy. Started making lots of noise, and it flew above me for a few seconds and just kind of just glided. It's going to be about 20 feet, maybe 15. That was probably my best guess on there.
15 or 20 feet in terms of
wingspan.
Okay, thank you. Pterodactyl sightings in a shocking scientific paper. Reports of living pterosaurs in the southwest Pacific, much of it about the Ropen in Papua New Guinea. Where did the information come from? Some of it was from a 2-week expedition in 2004, led by me and a group of natives on the tropical island of Amboy. A few weeks later, Garth Guessman and David Wetzel led the second expedition. Many native eyewitnesses were interviewed on Amboy Island.
Each one at Opal Beach.
Opal Beach, okay.
And then follow this ridge here, this ridge up to the Tarawe.
So he saw it from around Opal Beach and then it flew up toward...
to
Those 3 reports just shown, however, were at a distance and at night. I needed to interview natives who had clear views, closer and in daylight. I found those eyewitnesses just before I had to catch a boat to get back to the mainland. About 10 years earlier, when these 3 men were boys, they were in a group of 7 young islanders who hiked up to the Crater Lake.
Is this the first time you went to Pung, or the second time, or
first time?
Oh, the first time, okay. So this is the daytime? Yes. Did you see anything right away, or it was only later? Okay.
3 minutes later.
Oh, a few minutes later? Okay. Okay. Animal, is you call it ropen, is that the name they have for it? Ropen, okay. Did it have a tail?
Yeah.
It had a tail, okay. How long was the tail?
7 meters long.
7 meters?
But there's no feathers.
No comparison? Okay. So
No feathers.
no feathers?
Yeah,
Okay.
just skin only.
Okay. Is it just the skin?
Like beer.
Okay, like beyond.
Flying fox. Buno na bin rai yo, buno na bin nang. He did not show his head. It's too high, yeah.
Oh, it's too high?
Yeah.
Okay.
Long neck.
A long neck.
A long neck.
A long neck. And then did you leave as soon as you saw the ropen? Did you leave, or did you hide in the bush, or what happened? What did you do?
When we saw it,
You came back home? Oh, very frightened. If, years ago, he went to Lake Pung with Gideon.
when we now look at Gideon Pape Punge. Yes.
What did he-
Mugambe. This is open.
Okay. This is no joke. Where did this sketch come from? It was drawn by an eyewitness. About 3 years before this photo was taken, this little girl, Patty Carson, saw the flying creature in eastern Cuba in about the year 1965. Comparatively few people knew about her shocking encounter with what appears to have been a non-extinct long-tailed pterosaur at Guantanamo Bay. Now, look at what happened 6 years later in 1971, another sighting of a strange flying creature at Guantanamo Bay. A U.S. Marine was taking a break one day when he saw 2 of them. Please consider his own words, quote, "very close in range from where I was standing so that I had a perfectly clear view of them." Within minutes of his sighting, he drew this. Quote, "they had a long tail trailing behind with a tuft of hair at the end. The wingspan roughly 10 feet, could have been 8 feet or 12 feet. I've interviewed Eskin by phone several times over a period of years. He's a real person and stands by his testimony of what he saw in 1971. He also said, "There is no mistaking what I saw. It was middle of the day during our free time, a work day. No booze, no drugs, bright sun, and full visibility." I've spoken with both of these eyewitnesses many times, and both of them convinced me that they were telling the truth. I submit these two sketches as evidence in cryptozoology for the existence of these flying creatures that have been seen by many other eyewitnesses in North America and in other areas of the world.
First, consider a sighting of an apparent pterosaur at night in Queensland, Australia, around the Sunshine Coast. Here are some of the words of one of the two eyewitnesses. Quote, "My daughter, 13 years old, and I told the family as soon as we got home. We both saw it appear from the side of the road as a big shape moving fast. The wings were so big. They were bat leather-like. One wing covered the car. As it bent its wings to continue flight, you could see how strong it was. It was so close, I thought we were going to hit it. We could hear the loud swoosh noise it made with its wings twice before it went over the car and as it was going over. It is a modern car and the windows were up. That is a big noise. No feathers, just leather. Huge, moving fast, headed for Mount Coolum. There are caves there. It was headed straight to the mountain," unquote.
We're going into details a little bit on the sightings in Australia, in Perth, Australia, in December of 1997, at about 10:30 in the evening. Gigantic flying creature, lizard-like is what the lady said. It's a husband and wife couple that were taking a walk, and quote, "My husband and I both have talked about what we saw many times since that night in 1997, and yes, we believe it did have a tail, and don't believe they were feet, but actually a tail. It was a living creature. It was gliding across the night sky, flying quite low. Without a sound, there was no flapping of wings." And later her husband contacted me. He guessed the size of it between 30 feet and 50 feet in wingspan. He was shocked, but he described clearly what he saw. Now, why was this young man nervous while I interviewed him on a remote tropical island of Papua New Guinea in 2004? Was he just nervous because an American was interviewing him, or was it remembering the ropin'? About 10 years earlier, in the 1990s, he was one of 7 boys who hiked up to the crater lake they call Pung. Perhaps they ran along the shore, yelling, having fun. That's when a huge ropin' flew over the surface of the lake. What happened then? Came back home. How big was that flying creature? We'll get to that. Brian Hennessy was on the island of Bougainville, New Guinea in 1971 in a truck going down a mountain road when he saw what he later told me was a very unusual creature. I now quote Mr. Hennessy. "It was very big. It certainly looked prehistoric, with a longish, narrow tail, no feathers in sight," unquote. For any skeptic who might suggest he is crazy, please consider this. Mr. Hennessy is a professional psychologist. Now let's go back to 1944, during World War II, after the Japanese had left the area around Finchhaven, New Guinea. Dwayne Hodgkinson and his army buddy were in a jungle clearing in the middle of the day when something huge ran across the far side of the clearing, flapping its wings to get airborne. Hodgkinson at first assumed it was a bird, But then he saw that the flying creature was much too big, and it had a horn-like head crest. In a videotaped interview in 2005, Hodgkinson gave Garth Guessman an estimate for the length of the tail. Quote, at least 10 or 15 feet long, unquote. Did Hennessy in 1971 see the same kind of flying creature seen by Hodgkinson in 1944? These two silhouettes are composites chosen by these two men from among many images shown to them. The one on top was chosen by Hennessy, the one on the bottom by Hodgkinson. Both men reported a long tail on the flying creatures. Neither of the men had heard about the Ropen before they had their sightings. Let's now return to my expedition on Umboy Island in the year 2004. I interviewed 3 young men who had seen a Ropen fly over Lake Pung. Mesa was one of them. Wesley confirmed the sighting, and his brother Gideon answered many questions, including his estimate of the length of the tail.
Did it have a tail?
Yeah.
It had a tail, okay. How long was the tail?
7 meters long.
7 meters?
7 meters is 23 feet. Even if he was greatly mistaken or exaggerated, that flying creature was no bat. Could it have been a bird?
There's no feathers.
If there were no feathers, it was no bird.
Exciting email I got, and I'm going to have to read this off. Quote, these creatures are big enough and defensive enough to pose a genuine and serious threat to life. Quote, over the past few weeks, many of my neighbors' barn cats disappeared, neighbor to the north. Something at night has been eating their cats. Every few nights I hear a cat screaming its last breath trying to fend off something which kills it very quickly. Marks of struggle are seen, but no footprints or wing marks. And when she asked me to look around for tracks, I found no coyote tracks or dog tracks or tracks of any kind. Tonight, quote, this night this heavy big bird creature landed on the garage roof. The neighbor's dogs to the north went ballistic with frenzied barking that they make only when afraid. Quickly I turned off the lights, and quietly and very carefully I opened the door and went outside. I don't know how they got labeled as thunderbirds because I heard its wings as it flew away. It makes an audible woof, woof, woof sound of much air moved as its mighty wings power it at takeoff and climbing, then starting to flap slower as it gets about 50 or 60 yards above the terrain. At least this big one did. At takeoff, its wings flapped at a rate of about 3/4 seconds per flap. At that rate, the wings moved slowly. Okay, and it goes into details on that. We'll cover that in another time.
And I saw it start to dive, and so I continued to watch it.
I'll be brief. This is about 74 estimates of wingspan from eyewitnesses of apparent modern pterosaurs.
I saw something that I had only before witnessed in books. I didn't know there were such creatures at all.
What do these estimates mean? Well, these were taken from 128 eyewitness reports that I received up until the end of the year 2012.
Before one palay, na mikam kisimuan para man long gumlungon yalong mat bolong.
It's grave. You saw one come to the grave and.
These are the ones in feet, all the way from less than 2 feet to 46 feet.
And as soon as I got back into my car, I went to turn onto a highway. And as soon as I took a right and started going down the road, I looked up and I saw a large flying creature.
But it had a big wingspan. It had no tail. It had scalloped or webbed wings at the back.
I discovered that there could not be any hoaxes of any major importance, no major influence from hoaxes. Pterodactyl bird with no feathers. Sightings of living pterosaurs. About half a century ago, the USS Jouett, CG-29, was between the southwest Pacific and the Indian Ocean, or thereabouts, when 50 to 100 sailors went up to the deck to observe an apparent pterodactyl fly right over the ship. The wingspan was estimated 30 to 40 feet. The captain ordered that the word, quote, pterodactyl, unquote, be left out of any report. On a cloudy winter Monday morning in November 2017, when I was driving over the Fu Bridge to office in Taipei, Taiwan, I saw two mysterious flying animals that were exactly the same as in the film. I thought they were big migratory birds, but they rose in the air in a different way than most birds with bat-like wings. I was so shocked. 2 days later, at the same place and around time, I saw it again, only one. It's a pity that I can't record while driving. In 1978, I saw two pterodactyls flying side by side on the Front Range of Colorado. I thought these things are supposed to be extinct. It was the coolest thing I ever saw. Glad I'm not the only one to have witnessed such a thing. Why do some people believe in modern pterosaurs, also called pterodactyls or flying dinosaurs? Where is their evidence? Two eyewitnesses drew these two sketches. You'll not likely see this image on an expensive billboard, but you can find it on an inexpensive book or in a video or blog post. This is part of a video recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina in June of 2017. This poor quality cell phone footage, however, is not why so many people believe in ropens or modern pterosaurs. It's in eyewitness testimonies. Common persons see something uncommon. Jonathan Archer saw two large flying creatures in Minnesota in clear daylight. With one of them, he saw teeth in its beak. He said the wing flapping was unlike any bird. It was like a stingray in the ocean. The sighting was in 2018.
When you had this first sighting, around 2014 or so?
Yeah.
It was actually you and your dad both. So this is two
Yeah.
people.
He was actually be able to see the shape of the wings.
Two men see possible glowing pterodactyls at night at the Yakima River. Nocturnal pterosaurs.
He saw what he thought was a pterosaur, pterodactyl, what have you, in this tree right behind it.
Who saw a pterosaur that was sitting in this tree at sunrise? A man was driving to work and saw the animal here on 2 mornings. The cryptozoologist heard about that and came here at night to search for this kind of flying creature.
It came out of the tree, went up about 10 feet, did a question mark turn, quite acrobatic, very bright. There was no doubting it. But we couldn't see the animal. I think it was the flash, the way our eyes were adjusting to the flash, that we just didn't see the animal. But it was obviously a flying animal. And I would gather somewhere, probably a wingspan, something like this. And I got about here. We had another sighting, very interesting. That tree right down there on the inside, biggest one, I saw 2 lights, both streaking to about the center of that tree. Probably when you get to see the tree, it's about 25 feet in the air. And they shot right into the tree, and they were following one another by approximately 1 or 2 seconds.
Pterodactyl sighting or Ropin in West Virginia. I believe the following potential modern pterosaur sighting has never before been produced in a YouTube video. If I'm mistaken or forgot, sorry, but we now cover it here anyway. Many years ago, one night in West Virginia, a father and his daughter and son were in an outdoor hot tub. I now quote the words of the boy. Quote, "My sister was counting stars. She spots this giant winged creature flying across the sky. It was way up, and its wings were flapping slowly. It was glowing. unquote. This was a couple miles from Point Pleasant, West Virginia in October of 2014. Kongamato, Ropen, Pterodactyl, alive, with a big problem on Wikipedia. Let's dive into mysteries of the modern pterosaurs in 10 languages of Wikipedia. In what language are pterodactyls most often shot dead on Wikipedia? Many people would be surprised. Look at 4 words related to the possibility of modern pterosaurs: Ropen, Ahul, Orangbati, and Kongamato. In 10 Wikipedia languages examined, which ones have a Ropen page? Mandarin, Italian, and Russian. Which ones have an Ahul page? Mandarin, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian. What about an Orangbati page? Chinese and Italian. Which ones have a Kongamato page? Mandarin, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Polish, and Spanish. Why does the English Wikipedia have none of these 4 pages? The Mandarin Chinese Wikipedia has all 4 of them: Ropen, Ahul, Orangbati, and Kongamato. Those 4 cryptids are associated with modern pterosaurs, commonly called in English pterodactyls.
This is a brief overview of sightings of apparent living pterosaurs in the United States, in context with 2 sightings at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. In 2007, I began an email correspondence with a lady who had a sighting of what she called a pterodactyl when she was driving between Greenville and Florence, South Carolina, in the 1980s. Here's part of what she told me in her own words. It was about 3 p.m., and the thing flew over the highway in a remote area, like a lot of woods and swamps. It looked as big as any car and had no feathers, not like a huge crane or egret, but like a humongous bat. Big thing coming out of its forehead like a boomerang, and also the same in the back. It swooped down over the highway and back up gracefully over the pines.